Welcome! So, if you guys didn't know, I'm like a huge Paramore stan. I've been standing Paramore since I don't know. It's been a long time. You kind of grow up with your siblings and your parents. I kind of feel that way about Paramore, like they've just always been a part of my life. I want to talk about why Paramore is so great, but also why Black people think Paramore is so great. In the past couple of years, I've noticed a big trend on social media where Black people are sharing their unadulterated love for Paramore, and I love to see it. Seeing all these Black people on social media talk about Paramore and how much they love them, it's like looking into a mirror, and I'm kind of like, okay, so why weren't we doing this 10 years ago? Because I remember when I was in school and I was listening to Paramore and expressing my undying love for them, and all the other Black kids were like, that's white people music. And now it seems like Paramore isn't really so much white people music anymore. I mean, it seems like liking Paramore is one of the blackest things you can do right now. In 2018, there was a tweet that said Black people love Paramore, and I feel like ever since then, I've just been seeing more and more Black people talk about Paramore. The fact that there's a Still Into You drill remix that has gone pretty viral on TikTok is hilarious to me, but also is very telling on how the Black community feels about Paramore, you know what I'm saying? I should be So just some brief background, Paramore is an American rock band from Franklin, Tennessee. Hayley Williams moved from Mississippi to Tennessee, where she met Zach and Josh Farrow, as well as Jeremy Davis, who were the members of Paramore. Before Paramore actually formed, Jeremy Davis, the bass player, and Hayley Williams were actually in a funk band together, which I think is important to note that you should keep in mind throughout this video. In 2005, they released their first studio album, All We Know Is Falling, and since then they've released 4 studio albums, the most recent being After Laughter, which came out in 2017. Although they were backed by a label, they had pretty organic growth from the start and let kids find out about them through word of mouth and touring. And in 2007, they rose to major success during the release of their second album, Riot. This album contained one of their biggest hits still to this day, Misery Business, a pop-punk classic. Throughout the years, Paramore has experienced a lot of ups and downs within the band, mostly dealing with the personal drama of the individual band members. From Hayley Williams and Zach Farrow's past romantic relationship drama to rumors about Hayley and her role as a frontwoman in the band, members came and went. Every album cycle has consisted of a slightly different lineup, the most dramatic loss being when brothers Zach and Josh Farrow left the band in 2010.
The 3 of us are still here. We're not going anywhere. A lot of kids are still asking if the band is breaking up, and that just goes to show how broken the communication online can be when rumors start traveling. So
Paramore went on a very long hiatus shortly after that, but came back stronger than ever in 2013 during their self-titled era. Through that album, they birthed one of their biggest hits of all time, Ain't It Fun, as well as Still Into You. Currently, the band consists of Hayley Williams, Taylor York, and Zach Farrow. If you'd like a more detailed background on Paramore and their history as a band and all the things and fun little dramas that they've been through, then check out my Patreon. It's titled, Paramore is My Fleetwood Mac. Yep, this video is sponsored by me, my Patreon account, patreon.com/Madison Brown. If you'd like to get some extra content from moi, then I strongly recommend you check out my Patreon. I just posted a podcast episode about being a YouTuber. When people ask you, what do you do for a living? It's so interesting to me. It's so interesting to me that I made a hour-long podcast episode all about that, along with other pop culture related things that I have opinions on. And if you don't want to join the Patreon, that's totally fine, but if you want to subscribe or leave a like or something, I wouldn't be mad at that either, just saying. First, I want to touch on race records. So race records were a genre of music that was created by and advertised to Black people from the 1920s and existed until the 1940s. It wasn't common that Black musicians had the opportunity to record music until the 1920s, so once Black people began making records regularly, race records were created. The term race records was coined by OK Records in the 20s, but the term race records was actually abandoned post-World War II. Once blues and rock music became more popular within the mainstream, white people started to create their own jazz, blues, and rock records themselves. And because of this, artists like Elvis Presley really popularized the genre and soon became the face of the genre, despite Black artists being the ones who created it and pioneered it. Elvis Presley is famously known as being the king of rock and roll, and he's also famously known for being the singer of the song Hound Dog, which is actually by Big Mama Thornton. Elvis Elvis Presley is like the face of rock and roll, but in reality, the true faces of rock and roll are people like Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. What is really frustrating to me is the fact that Elvis Presley is well known around the world. He is, again, the king of rock and roll. However, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, she's considered the godmother of rock and roll, but more people know who Elvis is than Sister Rosetta Tharpe, when she was the one who has probably had the most influential and important impact on rock and roll music.
But my favorite singer was Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And she had made the guitar talk. Mm-hmm. And this black woman could play that guitar. Mm-hmm. And I got a chance to go on the stage with her one night.
Okay.
And she said, we got a little boy here named Little Richard. And he said he could beat me singing. And you know, I was crazy to tell that woman to her face that I could beat her singing.
But it's no surprise that a black woman is kind of erased from the history of rock and roll. I think, you know, as time goes on, people are becoming more aware, but I promise you, most people watching this now know who Elvis Presley is, but some people have probably just heard the name Rosetta Tharpe for the first time watching this video. So one of my favorite hip-hop artists is Mos Def, and he has an amazing song called Rock and Roll, which is essentially a hip-hop history lesson in rock music and the origins of it. In the song, he says, Elvis Presley ain't got no soul. Chuck Berry is rock and roll. You may dig on the Rolling Stones, but they ain't come up with the style on their own. Elvis Presley ain't got no soul. Little Richard is rock and roll. You may dig on the Rolling Stones, but they ain't come up with that shit on their own. As rock and roll started to progress, it seemed to become more and more of a quote-unquote white genre. Jimi Hendrix seemed to be the last hope when it came to owning and reclaiming rock music as a black genre, but even he was judged for being a black artist within the rock genre. Jimi Hendrix, who during his career was judged by many as a fraud or sellout, his blackness rendering his music as inauthentically rock at the same time that his music rendered his person as inauthentically black. By contrast, the very act of imaginatively engaging with historically black musical forms while keeping black bodies at arm's length became a newly powerful way of being white. Margo Jefferson, who is a writer, has also discussed Jimi Hendrix and his death and what she thought that meant for the black community and rock and roll music. She says, "The night Jimi died, I dreamed this was the latest step in a plot being designed to eliminate blacks from rock music so that it may be recorded in history as a creation of whites. Future generations, my dream ran, will be taught that while rock may have had its beginnings among blacks, it had its true flowering among whites. The best black artists will thus be studied as remarkable primitives who unconsciously foreshadowed future developments." And it seems as though Margo Jefferson's dream post Jimi Hendrix's death was quite prophetic, because it's true, to the point where black people themselves will consider rock music as white people music and ridicule and ostracize other black folks for listening to rock music because it's not within what is the current black stereotype today. And it's quite a shame, because quite literally, black people have been alienated from their own history and then continue to alienate other black people within the present because of the whitewashing of rock and roll. And that's really what inspired me to make a video that I made a while back. I forget exactly what it's called now, but it's like about being an Oreo, being white on the inside and black on the outside, and what exactly that means and kind of how ignorant it is, because I remember when I was really starting to get into Paramore and other emo bands, at the time I was told that, oh, that's white people music, why do you listen to that? And I didn't really get it, because I'm like, well, sometimes white people make good stuff. I'm just saying, sometimes white people make good stuff. And I'm not going to, limit myself just because it happens to be created by white people. But that whole sentiment is very ignorant and doesn't make sense, because how can rock music be white people music when black people were the ones who invented it? But I also don't blame black people for that ignorance on our own past, because it's not like this stuff is really taught in school. And again, rock and roll has been whitewashed over the years to the point where even black people don't recognize that it's actually ours and has always been ours to begin with. While many black performers of the 1960s have been regulated to book-length histories of black music generally, white artists like Bob Dylan or the Beatles receive increasingly lavish biographies and isolated critical treatments of musical output. Recognizing white people as individuals while acknowledging non-white people only in relation to collectives is a hallmark of racism across all cultures. You could agree that the entire history of white supremacy rests upon it. White people have been very successful in co co-opting and appropriating Black genres, not just rock and roll. I mean, we see it most commonly now with hip-hop, for example. I mean, Jack Harlow and Elvis Presley are basically the same person. What I find interesting about hip-hop and rock and roll is the fact that they very much mirror each other, not only with its appropriation from white folks and its popularity, but also in how these genres are displayed and represented by these artists. Rock ideology is first and foremost an ideology of authenticity. It delineates what constitutes real rock music, including who is authorized to play that music and who is authorized to listen to and talk about it. Since the 1960s, playing and consuming rock music has offered new ways into being a real white person. And in many quarters, being a white man became a precondition for making real rock music. And what makes a white man sellable within rock music, and the same with hip-hop, is being authentic and being real. Because if you're a white rapper, you're either authentic or you're corny, and there's really no in between. And you can be considered both in the public throughout your career. I mean, just look at Logic, for example. He's both been very much praised and validated as a rapper, but it seems like in the past few years, it seems that he is more so now perceived as a corny rapper than a real authentic one. But all that being said, let's talk about how Paramore fits into all of this, because a lot of the things and points that I brought up earlier, I think tie into why Black people love Paramore. One being the most obvious, that Black people invented rock and roll, so of course they're gonna like a rock bands like Paramore. But I think Paramore in specific really stands out compared to other emo bands that came up during their era, and the way that they resonate with Black folks is very interesting and unique to me. So first and foremost, the most important ingredient to making a good emo song is emotion. Paramore's angsty, head-banging pop-punk sound resonates with Black teens heavily for its unabashed expression of emotions. The expression of anger, pain, and angst is really cathartic and liberating. We know the feeling of angst all too well, and especially as Black kids, when you grow up, you are faced with a lot of anger and confusion as you learn about the world around you and the system that you've been born into. This is why Black people love and created blues music, because it's emotional and cathartic, and it's music that we can really relate to on a deep level. There's a vulnerability in associating with pain and sadness that has always lived in that narration. For example, the blues. Black people have always loved the blues. They basically created the blues. Black people created rock music. It's a fact. Black people created bluegrass and rock and roll way before Elvis Presley and the Beatles. Black people created punk. The band Death was way before the Ramones. Same with Bad Brains. If you think about it, the wool has been pulled over our eyes. This is our very naturally. That's why we return to it. I think another reason why Black folks tend to resonate with Paramore so much is the fact that they have a lot of religious references in their music. Although now Paramore isn't considered a Christian band, when they first started out, they kind of were. A lot of their songs reference God and their relationship to God and their experience with Christianity. One of my favorite songs that is about religion by Paramore is called Turn It Off of their Brand New Eyes album. They start the song with a killer opening line that goes, "I scraped my knees while I was praying and found a demon in my safest haven. It seems like it's getting harder to believe in anything and just to get lost in all my selfish thoughts." But even though not every Black person is religious, of course, a lot of Black people tend to be religious and are Christian, and a lot of Black folks, especially in the South, grew up in the church. So I think Paramore being from the South and also having that Christian background really just resonates with Black people in a way that is not seen in other rock bands of their time and of their genre. And I also think that a lot of Paramore's songs sonically represent this relationship to the church.
Black people are obsessed with Paramore is probably because their chords sound like gospel songs.
If you can't tell by my profile picture, then I don't know what more you need. But yes, the reason why I think Black people do like Paramore so much is because their chords do resemble a lot of gospel music, and you want to know why? Because during the All We Know Is Falling era, when Paramore first got together, they were considered a Christian rock band, and you can actually hear a lot of the influences on the first album. And one of the biggest ones is obviously Ain't It Fun, so that is clearly one of a gospel-inspired track, but if you look at other tracks, you could definitely see this. Some semblance with, playing God, Conspiracy from All We Know Is Falling, even the only exception if you can think about it as a slowed down gospel song. And if you think about how Hayley does write her music, a lot of it can be interpreted as worship to God if you look at the lyrics in an introspective way and how that relates to your faith. Yeah, Hayley has talked about how growing up in the church has definitely influenced her sound and her music and her writing, so of course that would play into how the band sounds.
I mean, if you listen to Ain't It Fun, there's a huge gospel influence to that. I mean, there's literally a gospel choir in the song. And, you know, that's one of the most adored Paramore songs by the Black community, if not the most.
Don't go crying to your mama, 'cause you're on your own in the real world.
She's definitely one of the best vocalists to exist in the past 10 years. I know that sounds like pretty intense, but I still have never seen a singer who can beat Hayley Williams' vocal performance and her on-stage presence and stamina. I mean, she's literally like a beast. I don't know how she does it. She always delivers clean and strong vocals. She's an incredible belter, and she can convey emotion through her voice like nobody else. I mean, she really has like the perfect voice for rock music, but she also has soul. That's right, sing it for me one more time. She's very versatile. I mean, her range is incredible.
Baby, not a day goes by that I'm not into you.
Definitely listen to All I Wanted by Paramore if you want to hear Hayley Williams' insane vocal range. One thing that Black people love is a good vocal performance, okay? I mean, R&B and gospel have really set our ears up for that and to enjoy that kind of voice. And I think Hayley Williams and her vocal ability really feels familiar to Black folk. Even outside of R&B and gospel, Black women tend to dominate vocally, even within pop music, for example. I mean, we've got artists like Whitney Houston, but then artists like Etta James and Ella Fitzgerald, Mimi Ripperton, Aretha Franklin, those women have all heavily influenced and inspired a lot of singers still to this day. Singers like Ariana Grande, Christina Aguilera, obviously Hayley Williams, Tori Kelly, Adele, Sam Smith, all those people who are white artists are very obviously and clearly inspired and influenced by Black singers who have, you know, paved the way. Also, I think it's important to note that vocal performance is not really a priority within rock music. So I think that's also why Paramore stands out as a band, because they have a female lead singer, and already that is an advantage because it's a bit different. But also, she has an incredible range and she can sing like nobody else. And so the fact that they have a pop punk band that also is led with incredible vocals really makes them stand out. I think over the years, Paramore has really developed a strong relationship towards their Black fans, and you can really see that, especially since, you know, like 2020 and, you know, things with George Floyd and everything like that. You know, although I don't necessarily applaud white people for being like Black Lives Matter on Instagram, I think Paramore, specifically Hayley Williams' approach and response to the world around them has been pretty solid and genuine. An interview that I really love is called Hayley Williams on Being Influenced by Solange, Erykah Badu, and Paramore's Black Fandom. How much has Southern culture and music, specifically Black artists, influenced your work? I think making this record has opened my eyes to just how impactful Black artists have been to me throughout my entire career. My mom listened to everything. We listened to Janet Jackson in the car. She was a huge Black Sabbath fan. My father was super into Motown and Elvis. Listening back to the way that I wrote with Paramore, actually writing with the guys was a shock to my system because it was very much not what I had grown up listening to, but it was the way I was expressing myself naturally through rock music. I think being from the South too, there are things that just aren't going to show through. Like, I was obsessed with Juvenile, Outkast, and Lil Wayne in the 6th grade. That's what I was listening to with my girlfriends on the basketball team. The same with TLC and Aaliyah. Right now, politically, so much is happening in the South. What has this moment of uprising brought up for you? One thing that's been interesting is how I quickly had a holistic passion for politics. Growing up in the South, politics is a point of tension. It scared me. But it's incredible to me at 31, the universe has prepared me for a moment such as this. To wake up and be passionate authentically, and just to speak on the grief. It is an intense type of grief, an intense type of empathy that I've never touched before, knowing that I cannot go around saying that I understand what it feels like to live that experience, but to find a place in my heart that is angry for the Black community as a whole. There's been a huge public showing of love from Black fans. Has that been primarily online, or have you been aware of this because of the last few years of online praise? It's been been both, but I would say for me, the fan base of crowds at shows was starting to diversify more towards the end of Self-Titled. We did a tour called Writing the Future right after Ain't It Fun won the Grammy, and it was all over the radio. It was this crazy victory lap where we did smaller shows, so it was a more intimate setting. I noticed when we played Baltimore, by the way, I was at that show, in a venue that we hadn't played before, the crowd was half black, half white. I was one of the black people. And it was so obvious to me that the crowds were changing. I grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, and the town was very 50-50. I was used to being around people that didn't necessarily look like me. Then I moved to Franklin, Tennessee, and it was predominantly white and still is. And when Paramore went on tour, we were playing to white punk and emo kids. As you've written about, black people did not feel comfortable or particularly welcome in those scenes. I think there were a couple of frontmen who were black in the middle scene like Howard Jones or Killswitch Engine, but that was kind of it. I always found it weird that we would just play to a small room of white kids, and we would go to California and we would have a pretty strong Filipino base because we started off touring with My American Heart, who were all Filipino. I got really emotional on the After Laughter tours because I realized I was living the dream. I'd been watching the Talking Heads movie Stop Making Sense every night to fall asleep while we were making After Laughter. A lot of members of Parliament Funkadelic were touring with Talking Heads at the time in 1983, and they pan out on the crowd at the end of that movie, and it's a hodgepodge of people. I was emotional during Tour 5, like, holy shit, this is Stop Making Sense. It's happening. That's a beautiful quote, but Hayley Williams really said, I had a dream! Black and white kids would headbang at Paramore concerts together in peace. But yeah, lastly, I think their ability to grow and reinvent themselves over the years has allowed them to increase their fan base and diversify their fan base and to stay relevant for all these years, because Paramore is still very relevant to this day. Now, nostalgia is like a really big thing right now. Like anything that was made in the early 2000s is like very trendy, so Paramore has definitely been a part of that. But also, as a Paramore fan myself, I still am very active with them and I still keep up with their music and will continue to go to their tours. I'm a big fan personally, but I think there's something to be said about that because I don't really listen to pop punk music that much anymore. Paramore is like the only band that I feel like I still have a strong connection to in that way because their music is so good that it just continues to be relatable even once you're past that angsty teen era of your life. They've managed to grow with their audience and they've changed their sound over the years, and even members. I mean, members have been in and out, and I feel like that has kind of forced them to reinvent themselves and their sound throughout the years. And although it may have been hard, I think it really has served them well in their ability to continue to evolve over time and not stay stagnant and to have not been left behind in 2009. Even their album Self-Titled talks about this, and the whole premise around that album is looking towards the future and growing up. So all in all, why do Black people love Paramore? Well, Black people created rock music. Paramore just makes great songs that are relatable and authentic no matter how old you are. And Hayley Williams has an incredible voice. And most importantly, they are true and authentic to themselves and really care and respect their Black fans. I love Paramore so much, and I hope you guys have a greater appreciation and love for Paramore after watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Go subscribe to the Patreon and stream my music, please. Thank you and good night.